One that I love the most is Ifuru, Efuru, Ifuru by Flora Novaka, right? And the reason I love it because it has one of the most amazing female protagonists. And it deals with issues of culture where the colonialism is on the fringes of it and captures the lives of this young protagonist within the Igbo culture. Right? The politics is there, but it's more about showing, how does this young woman live her life, right? If you want a more strident engagement with colonialism and race, then I would recommend George Laming's In the Castle of My Skin, right? Because that deals with race and colonialism. And the third one that I would recommend, which does both, which deals with issues of race, identity, and colonialism, is, of course, Michelle Cliff's A Bank, Abeng, A Bank. These are the three novels that I would highly recommend for anyone to read, especially if you want to really get into post-colonial studies. Yes, I mean, nonfiction by its very nature, as a genre of writing, is writing your life or writing about something that is happening in the world. So creative nonfiction, if it is not subjective, it will be a form of reportage, right? Or it will be representing some reality. So chances are it is even more deeply caught within the politics of that time or moment, right? So even if you pick up the most elevated Abbiti, I mean, even if you pick up Kare Jahan Daraz Hai, right? A lot of people don't like Kuratul Haider because, she was very upper class and bourgeois, but Kare Jahan Daraz is a political narrative, right? It's a story in 3 volumes of her life, her family, and the politics that surrounded them. So I would say creative nonfiction has more of an immediacy to it, because sometimes, even if you're telling your own story, you're telling about the powers around you, family, culture, politics that impact your life. And if it is a story, a creative nonfiction piece, or a book about an event or about, someone else's life, then it may not be subjective, but it still is representing someone caught within the web of life itself. So chances are it could be even more political, right, than just a novel or a poem, right? So that's how I would deal. Now, yeah, can it be artistic? Absolutely. Can it be high literature? Yes, absolutely, right? But is it likely to be more political? I think so. Doesn't matter who you use, Foucault or Althusser or Marx or Erik Erikson or all the third, fourth psychology people. What you're trying to suggest is, how is a human subject constituted? How do we become who we are, right? That is the question that we try to answer in our research. How does a character become what he, she, or they are, right? That's a question of identity, right? Then you can approach it from an essentialist point of view, which would be, okay, I am made by Buddha or made by God or made by so and so. There is an imprint in me of the divine and I am immutable. I have essential traits. That's an essentialist view of identity. If anytime someone claims women are like that and men are like that, that means they are relying on an essential concept of identity, that we have essences that display themselves in terms of our gender or whatever. So that if you are doing that, if you are suggesting that this person is Baloch, this person is Pathan, this person is Punjabi, and you're associating immutable natural traits to them, you're being an essentialist. Living in a post-colonial nation, that's a very dangerous thing to do, because remember, essentialism was what upon which the edifice of colonial empires was built, right? Um, that's how we were essentialized by the colonizers, right? And treated as stereotypes, as people who were unchangeable, immutable, right? And so keep that in mind. That's the drawback in all kind of essentialisms. The other view is maybe you think identity is constructed, right? That's constructivism. How is it constructed? Your class defines who you are, your family, the school you go to, the region in which you live, your religion, your culture, all of these things determine what kind of a person you are, what you believe in, what kind of identity do you express in the world, how you represent yourself, right? So that's we giving more of a chance to things around us to determine who we are and define who we are. That's the constructivist view, right? Then there is the idea whether or not there is a central core to us, right? If you believe in that centered humanistic concept of being human, right? Then the identity formation you believe in is that there is a centered human self. When I look deeper into myself, I find Masood Raja sitting somewhere in the deepest parts of my heart, right? And no matter where I go, I can retrieve that person, right? That is me believing that it's me, human being, rational, capable of rational thought, in control of my actions, right? That's the centered concept of identity. When you mentioned Foucault, Foucault sort of inaugurates the de-centered subject. And what is a de-centered subject? A de-centered subject is a subject that is not determined from within. That's what we call anti-humanism of Foucault. It's a subject constituted by discourses within which they are caught, right? Religious discourses, cultural discourses, class-based discourses, knowledge discourses, all of these over-determine who you are, right? And how you perform your identity. Then if you go to Judith Butler, then we learn the concept of the identity as a performative act, right? Even gender identity as a performative act. There is no essential man or woman. The way we behave as a man or a woman or someone else in between is determined by the performance that we offer to the world, right? And we internalize that performance. So think of it this way. You all are in Faisalabad. Shaista is in Lahore. Both of them are in Pakistan, right? When you go out in the street as women, depending on where you are, Shaista probably can afford to go out in the street in her car without wearing a shawl and a chadar. That's her performative identity within the constraints of the culture that she lives. My mother and sister, right? When we lived in Pindi, my sister, she has had a career. She's a working woman. When we go to Attak, to our grandparents' family, the moment they take the turn to the little road that goes to our village, they immediately cover their faces up, because they know that's the identity they have to perform there, right? But when they are at their job, at their work, तो वो शायद थोड़ा छोटा सा दुपट्टा कर लेती हूँ या ये वो. So that is the performative aspect of identity. You are not choosing to perform it. You have internalized the imperatives to your body, right? And then you perform that identity. Now, I would highly recommend that you all read Erik Erikson, right? Because his idea of identity, the question in pedagogical situations like this is that identity is the prime motivator of our actions. We are constantly emotionally and physically trying to protect our identity, right? And as we enter a new space, you remember, all of you must have had this experience. When you enter a new space where you don't know anyone, you're anxious. And the reason you're anxious is because your idea of self is in crisis. And what stabilizes it, if you see a face in the group that you know, and if that person looks at you and waves at you, your anxiety goes down. The reason it goes down is because you've been hailed, you've been acknowledged by a person who knows you as who you are, right? So, what that teaches us, that our identity needs are the prime needs. We are constantly working on defending that identity, right? We're constantly asking ourselves, am I being myself, right? Or am I not being myself? Am I being forced to be someone else, right? So when you teach literature, you will see you encounter different kind of students in your classes. If a student is feeling threatened by what you are saying, chances it's not the way you are saying it. It's because what you are saying is challenging their core concept of their self. And so they see it as a threat. And the moment we see an identity threat to ourselves, we either flight, we run away, or we try to protect our identity, so we become belligerent, or we do self harm in so many cases. What that teaches us, that then our teaching, if you're going to change minds, you cannot break people apart and rebuild them. That's the most destructive strategy you can have. You have to help your students to expand their idea of self so that their identities become pro-social and expansive, right? And so that's the role of identity then in pedagogy. And I'm going to stop here after one more thought. I think it was like in my head here. Uh, so, overall, the latest research in pedagogy and brain science and psychology is that the most important register under which we all function is recognition, which is connected to our identity, and not redistribution, which is kind of, you know, hurtful to us leftists, right? Because all our lives we have fought for redistribution. It was like redistribute the wealth and people will be happy. And now we are learning no, recognition is actually more important to people, right? So let me give you an example. You all work for NUML, right? I know this institution long before it became NUML. Your director or your rector or whosoever that is, if they call you in their office and tell you, we are sorry, we don't have enough funding, so we can't give you a raise. Like there is a budget crunch. And chances are you'll walk out of there and you'll say, thank you, sir, no problem, I understand. But if your director or rector, they constantly not recognize your efforts, not appreciate your work, right? That will be more hurtful to you because there is no rational reason behind it. But by withholding recognition from you, they are actually doing more harm to you because you seek that recognition. When you put in a good day's work, all you want to hear is, great job. Thank you for doing this. This really helps our students a lot. It doesn't cost anything, right? But it is more effective than saying मैं आपको 15,000 रुपए दे रहा हूँ क्योंकि आपने कॉन्फ्रेंस करा दी. Who cares? 15,000 में तो आजकल 2 डिनर नहीं आते पाकिस्तान में, right? But 5 sentences from a superior who has power over you will make you work twice as hard, right? And that is the power of recognition. American corporations absolutely get it, right? Like on your birthday, they'll give you like a cheap little toy and a card and a cake, right? They'll never give you a raise, but they'll make sure that you get an email. Thank you so much for all the great things that you do, because they have done their research and if they realized workers are happier when they are praised and recognized. So the question of identity then breaks on this mountain, right, of recognition. Right? We all seek it, and how to give it to your students, to yourself, and to others. It's a very long answer to your question, but I hope it was useful to you. I is the thing. I don't think of it as an exile because it was a voluntary thing, right? But if you have read your Said, you know the definition of exile is um, more complicated than that. But I always go with Walter Manvolo, right? There is a beautiful sentence in his book, The Darker Side of Modernity, in the introduction, where he says that it is not where we live that matters, it is where we dwell, right? The thing is that, and my wife knows it, right? We've been married, say, that I've lived in America and I've picked up all the great things that I could from here. Anything that I thought would enhance my self, I never thought this is American and I made it part of me. But I have always dwelt in Pakistan. Okay. And the reason is very simple. You know, I didn't become a Pakistani because in 1947, some people in UP decided they needed a separate country. My family has lived in the same village for more than 600 years. Our graves are there. We have our own stories. We have our own history. So if you keep that alive, then you live in two cultures. But what do I miss? Right here now in United States. I can never have what I have in Pakistan. I can never walk into a shop and not be judged for my looks, right? And I here, you know, I have friends, I'm respected. I had a career which I ended just recently. Uh, when you are in your own land, when you are in your own culture, despite the problems, at the end of the day, you're in your own culture, right? No one can tell you that you are less than them simply because you look a certain way or you came from a certain place. That's the beauty of living in your original culture. And so now, after building a career over 25 years and trying to convince people that I was good enough, it finally broke down on this one little thing is recognition, right? Where people, not all of them, a few of them, were trying to convince me that I wasn't a good enough human being, that I wasn't a good enough professor, because of maybe I didn't dotted an I over there or a T over there, right? And that's where I had to make a decision. And the decision was, do I continue what I'm doing here and deal with these people, or do I just, you know, surrender my guns and say, you win? Fine. My life is not going to end over here, right? I will keep doing what I do the best. That is what I'm doing right now, right? Share the little I know with. So the feeling of exile hits you when you miss things that you can't replicate. I can't replicate here, you know, stopping on GT Road and going to a driver hotel and ordering dudpati, right? I can't replicate that here. I can't replicate, going to Sadar Rawalpindi, right? And Chota Bazaar, right? Going to my village. So those are the things you miss as you grow older, right? Um, I'm a U.S. citizen, right? I waited 15 years before I applied for U.S. citizenship. Right? Just for technical reasons, I needed it because I wanted to travel more easily. But on the other hand, I'm as American as you want because I believe in freedom of expression. I believe in total equality of all genders and sexes. I absolutely do not buy into this idea that women are somehow supposed to do the domestic work. And no, in our house, Jenny loves to cook, so she does cooking most of the time. But when she looks at me and says, "Hey, hon, I made dinner, would you do the dishes?" You know, I was like, "Yeah, that's my job," right? Uh, there is no shame in that. So So those are some of my ideas, but I have never carried this chip on my shoulder that worrying about how people are viewing me and how they are responding to me, because by and large, I'm lucky in my life that wherever I have lived, people have always loved me and liked me and taken care of me. So here is the thing, don't worry about it. The problem in Pakistan isn't that there aren't enough trained people or there aren't enough scholars. The problem in Pakistan is that deflection is our national pastime. तो वो कैसे? ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋ ਕਿ ਯਾਰ जो है ਤੁਹਾਡੇ सूबे च करप्शन हो रही है, तो जवाब ये नहीं होगा कि हाँ यार कहाँ हो रही है, लेट्स राइट अबाउट। जवाब होगा पर इंडिया में भी तो होती है। We always deflect things politically, right? And when we deflect, what it does is we are always looking for someone to blame. And what that does is it takes away from us our ability to look at our own actions and then rephrase them and borrow knowledge from the world. So you want to represent Pakistan, right? Great. How will you do that? You master the discourses of the so-called masters. Learn their knowledges. Learn what they are saying, where their debate is, right? Read. Jaise Ikra, Bismi Rabbikallazi Khalaq. Read until you know where the debate is in the world in a certain given field. Then you infuse it what knowledge you bring from your own culture, right? And then you will become a formidable scholar. I have done it. I know how it works. Why do we unsettle people? Why do people become defensive against people like me and others? Because we can mobilize 7 languages, right? All they have is probably 2, right? So learn where the debate is, global debate in your field, and then bring your own cultural knowledge to it. You can't do it जैसे मौलवी लोग करते हैं ना कि एक मस्जिद में बह गया ते जिड़ा अपना सच है उसी ते बोलते जाओ. If you look at medieval Islam, before the Mu'tazila were wiped out, right, by the reactionary forces, the Muslim philosophers would have the tradition of Munazara, right? And the Munazara wasn't as they did in India, where our book says so. No. They used to know the debates of their opponents. If you have ever read any of the works of Al-Ghazali, right? Al-Ghazali says in one of his book on Talimi Ismailiya, right? He says that don't read only the beginning of my book. Read the whole book, because in the beginning part, I will give you the most convincing argument of my opponents. And if you just read that, you will go convinced about them. But I must first give you how do they convince you, how do they argue, and then in the latter part of the book, I will dismantle those claims, right? So what that teaches us that Al-Ghazali didn't just bring his own bag of books and 2 or 3 other philosophers. No, he would go and read his opponents, read how they argue, and then build his argument, right? So if you want to be a post-colonial scholar, right, when my students come to me over here, my doctoral students, I give them a list of 280 books. They have to read those books for their comprehensive exams. They get about a year to read them. And I can promise you, when they come into the defense, the first question that I ask them, they usually cannot answer it if they had only read those 280 books. So by and large, my students, my doctoral students, read about 300 to 350 books. That gives them a grounding in the field. And then beyond that is their research that they do for dissertation. So it's a long journey. It's a fun journey, right? If you want to fight the fight of culture. I would say if you want not a fight, if you want to talk about your culture, know your own culture, and then know the field where you're going to talk. And then you'll be formidable. Think of Edward Said, think of Gayatri Spivak. These are the people who can be your role models. What Said does is not a divide. What Said does is he puts the primacy of Western assumptions under erasure, but Said himself is a modernist. Said could have not be Said if he hadn't had a Western education. His argument in Orientalism is not possible without Foucault, right? Because that's where he's using Foucault's theory of discourse. His argument will not be possible without knowing, you know, literary texts as they were taught to the modernists. And then the brilliance of Said isn't that he creates a dichotomy. He never creates a dichotomy. What he is talking about is how the object of colonialism is produced through discourse, right? That's what he's talking about. You will see his brilliance if you pick up the text, the critic, right? I think it's page 34, but I'm getting old, so I don't remember those things. Where he's discussing how texts are worldly and our engagement with them is motivated. And that's where he brings in knowledge, right, from the Middle East, from the Arab tradition. He brings in knowledge from Al-Andalus, right, from these three grammarians who were Zahiriya scholars, right, against the knowledge of Batiniya scholars, right? And so that's the brilliance of Said, because he could pull from other traditions and force it into the Western way of thinking things. So I don't see Said as that. I see Said as someone who unleashes the kind of writing and thought that changes disciplines and inaugurates new ones, right? New fields. So the problem with Pakistani political thought now is that it is reactionary and it's binaristic, right? So what ends up happening is that people have created this binary. There is the West and there is us. Everyone is out to get us, right? That is a very hard place to be in as a national culture, because what that means is that you're already foreclosing the possibilities of knowledge that you could use and make your own, right? By impugning onto it all the negative aspects. And what it also does internally is that it makes the politicians and people, it gives them an excuse to not look at their own actions and practices critically. So, how does a culture grow? How does it make itself better? By adopting what is good outside and importing it and making it their own. And two, by constantly reflecting on our own actions and changing them, right? Culturally, collectively, right? So think of it this way. This is our culture. I grew up in it, right? In 1975, if you went to any Kiryana shop anywhere in the world, in Pakistan, the family planning was so big that you could find condoms in a bowl. We used to make balloons out of them. It was possible to do that in Pakistan. Think of doing that in Pakistan today. I mean, chances are your shop would be burned, right? How did that happen? I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. How did we become so intolerant? We became so intolerant because we started defining what constitutes being Pakistani, what constitutes being a Muslim in narrower and narrower terms. And if you do that, right, if you define what is proper in narrower and narrower terms, then you can create these others in your local cultures, right? People become targets, right? And people become targets because you have assumed, oh, this person is not rightly Muslim. This woman is not rightly a Muslim in a Muslim woman mode, right? And so then increasingly you become an intolerant society. So here we are, 21st century. Everyone is using mobile phones. They're all made in China but owned by Western companies. Everyone is wearing clothes made by third world developing country labor sold to us, by the grand corporations. Jeans, everyone is into brands. We have no problem importing all the destructive parts of the grand neoliberal capital. Then our brothers who are bent upon taking us to 8th century, the pickups that they drive are made in Japan. The guns that they use are made in Russia. The bombs that they use are some made in America, some made in Norway and Denmark, right? So they have no problem importing the destructive cultural things, material things, and things that destroy life. But the only problem they have is if you pick up a few good ideas from the West and try to infuse them into your own culture, right? That's where the line is drawn, right? So Pakistan increasingly in my own lifetime has become an increasingly more and more intolerant place, right? Who is doing it? America is making us intolerant and unkind. Is Britain doing that? Are our former colonial masters doing that? No, we are doing it to ourselves by not questioning our own practices, by not questioning what we do to each other, and by borrowing all the terrible things that the world has to offer, and by foreclosing all the liberating ideas that we can have, right? So, is there a recipe for change? I don't know. I mean, the change will have to come from within, right? It is not in America's interest or Britain's interest to keep Pakistan poor, right? It is not in their interest to keep Pakistan dependent, but that's where we are, right? So, my I don't have solutions. My point is, culturally speaking, we need to look at our own behavior, right? How do we behave publicly, especially men? And people often ask me questions about what do I think of my students in America. I love my students in America. I've taught at 3 research universities. My current university has 38,000 students, right? My alma mater has 40,000 students. In my 20 years of life in United States, I have never seen a male student or a group of them standing under a tree or against a wall, ogling women or whistling at them or saying things to them. I have never seen it. If you do it on one of our campuses, you are culturally dead. People won't even talk to you. People would call you a creep. They will call you, a harasser, right? I have seen that on Pakistani campuses. So, as a culture, if you really want to reflect on your actions, yeah, Amriki bahut bure log hain yaar, sorry, they are greedy, they're all, that's very easy to use. But when you walk around your campus, especially men, ask yourself, how do we conduct ourselves? How do we behave around our teachers? These are all the tropes that we used to have, that we respected our teachers and we were deeply grateful to them. You'll see that amongst our students. 99.9% of the cases, right? So I don't know what the recipe is, but it must start amongst the people, amongst the young people, right? Uh, Reflecting on their own conduct, collective and individual, I think. Here is what I have learned in my life, right? There are many ways you can live your lives in, but be generous, be kind. When someone needs help from you, instead of trying to impede them, ask yourself, how can I help this person? Because when you guide your life with that kind of attitude, then you become an enabler. You become a person who takes obstacles away from people, right? And if you do that, you know, you will see how your culture will shift, your departmental culture, institutional culture. The problem in any given culture is always that people become so possessive of their power and possessive of the things that they have to dish out, right? But if we could develop this habit of saying, you need help, this is the most I can do, I'll do it, right? Or guide someone. And so that has worked really great for me in every culture that I've lived in. So have that spirit of generosity and kindness and compassion.